Hey people, Shaman here for Shamanic Lodge. This is going to be another true shamanic stories. This one's going to be about what I call the AIDS Sweat Lodge. I wish I could come up with a better title for it, but that's been it for since 1998. But this is an interesting case that I worked with somebody that had full-blown AIDS back in 1998 on a property I was working in Davie, Florida. It's a house on a 5 acre lot, and the owner of which wanted to be that property and house to be used for spiritual development of the community. And so after he and I came to an agreement, and I signed on to that project, and I was there for about 18 months, year and a half ish. So, um, where to start? So a woman came to me for an appointment, and this woman had full blown AIDS. And when I did meet her in person, she had to be assisted out of the car, into the house, and down to be able to sit down. I mean, she was a very, very fragile being that was only given a couple weeks to live. And usually, when people come to me, that's usually the doctors tell them a couple months, couple weeks, or so on. But honestly, when I was looking at her, and she looked like somebody like in those pictures you see of Auschwitz. That's the kind of condition she was in, and a couple weeks of life seemed generous. And and I'd never seen anybody in that kind of physical condition before. So we had talked a little bit about how she really believed in alternative healing. We talked that she heard about me, my reputation. She really wanted to meet me, and wondering if I would work with her. And I said, well, yeah, I'll do my best. I never make promises or guarantees, but um, were you thinking of anything in specific? She said, yes, I want to do a sweat lodge. And I was like, well, no, but I've heard these things you do, Hawk. You've had great results with people. And I'm like, yes, ma'am. But, part of why I get great results in particularly a sweat lodge is because of some of the extreme conditions in the lodge itself. An intense heat, a closed-in environment. There's a lot of steam, kind of restricted breathing. It kind of like puts the non-essential systems in sleep mode. You can sit in there in spirit, in the physical body. But realistically, ma'am, I just think your body's going through enough of all it can handle at this time. And she was like, no, I can just feel it. I'm so sure. And she really was. And I could tell she really believed what she was telling me. But at the same time, I had to wonder if hope had taken over reality. And I think a lot of times hope is a product of fear, you know. And but her friend was just looking at me sympathetically, and I had to look at this and like, well, I have to think about this. I mean, I just can't make a decision like this, you know, this quickly for extreme conditions. But I promise I'll give it a thought for a couple of days and get back with you. And she goes, okay, I appreciate that. Now she was probably in her, I want to say her mid 30s. And when by the way, she would tell me the sweat lodge, the logical side of me just went like, whoa, no. But in my heart, I felt good with the idea. There was a big contradiction going on in me with this, and they left, and we had to help her back in the car, and they left. And at the house meeting, I had a different team I worked with. I mentioned this, and they're like, wow, that's heavy. That'll be one of your biggest cases. I'm like, no, this will be my biggest case, one way or the other. And they're like, what do you mean one way or the other? I'm like, well, if I decide to do this, it could turn out really bad. And then what? And they're like, oh, they understood that part. My girlfriend then was a doctor, and I told her about this. And she's like, no, don't do this. I'm like, okay, I just want to get your opinion. A friend of mine that I he was a doctor as well. I asked him, and he's like, "No, Hawk." He goes, "Buddy, I've heard you do some great stuff, but could be the stupidest thing you've ever done, and for you, that's saying a lot." Thanks, man. But he goes, "No, Hawk, you'll kill her, you'll catch AIDS, and you'll probably die from that when you're in prison." And I'm like, he goes, "That's the best scenario I can see for you out of this whole thing." He goes, "And you know me. I've listened to you. We've talked before." I'm like, "Yeah, yeah, okay." I'm like, "Wow, okay." So now I'm looking at me. Am I just not seeing things clearly? So I kept thinking about it more and more, and I finally called the owner of the property and I said, "Hey, this is a case that I have coming, and I just wanted to put this to you. And you could say no, don't do it, because it's going to affect you too." And he goes, "You're there because I trust you. Is there anything else?" I'm like, "No." He goes, "All right, have a nice day." And I'm like, "Okay, so it's all on me." And I had to do some deep, deep soul searching on this because of this contradiction that was going on within me. My logical, practical side was this like, oh no, this woman's delusional, this woman's whatever, this is just a bad idea. But the other, my heart, the shamanic side of me was just like, no, this will be fine. And that's it. Nothing else, no explanation, just, oh, this will work. I'm like, wow. I woke up one morning, a few days later, and just like, yeah, I'll do it. And of course, a lot of people were just like, my team in that house, it was a wide variety of people. This is also towards the end of the project, and they understood why I would do it, and the fine tuning part about it was that there was no proof that it wouldn't work. Now, logic said that, okay, just a basic evaluation on reference, things in the past and so on, but there wasn't any absolute proof it would turn out like that. And that's the part that I went for. And you could look at that as like, well, that's like a really desperate grasp of hope, or maybe you're a little delusional yourself. Maybe, your ego's getting in the way. Maybe, I'm checking through this list myself, looking at all this, and it's like, well, uh, yeah, we could go with all that, but I don't know why, but I'm going to do this. So I called her up and I said, yeah, we'll do this. Let's set it up for this weekend. And they said yes, and they're happy. So when the woman gets there, and she's just elated that I'm going to actually do this, but I'm looking at her condition, and she looks even worse than she did a week ago, because the doctor did say a couple weeks. And then I'm really looking at myself like, why, you know? And so it's evening time. The fire's already been started down where the sweat lodge was on this property. It was about 5 acres property. And the team that was down there, the one to volunteer to be in the lodge with me, some Reiki masters, some couple other shamanic practitioners, witches, so we were going to have a full lodge of about 10 people, with including myself and this young lady. And so we walked down there, and it took a while, walking across another acre field to get to the location of the sweat lodge. And they're looking at the lodge, this lady and her friend. And then my team just like wants to talk to me, and they go, we're sorry, but we can't go in there with you." Okay, why? We're scared of the AIDS, scared of everything. I was like, oh, okay. I guess this is that moment where it's like no longer metaphysical, woo woo. It's like, this is real. And they're like, yeah, okay. So it was a good reality check for them, because a lot of times in the new age spiritual movement, people don't take things too seriously. It's just like an excuse to put your imagination out there and make yourself look good and whatever. But when the serious cases come up, it's just like, uh oh, reality check. I'm like, okay. we can do that. And they said, well, we'd like to stay around. Okay, we can do that. And then, so the fire is about done. I mean, with um, the rocks are about red hot, and we're getting ready to get in there and putting the rocks into the stone pit. And if, for those of you who don't know what a sweat lodge is, and there's plenty of pictures on YouTube's, and you can Google it or whatever. So we're putting the rocks into the lodge, and I went back and I assembled that team up again. And I was like, by the way, people, if you start to hear a lot of yelling or screaming in there, I want you to come over to the lodge, pull all the blankets off of it, take your knives and start cutting the strings, taking apart the lodge around us in the most malicious and destructive way you can. I want you to be quiet about it, but then break up the branches that make up the lodge and throw them in the fire. Now they're looking at me like really surprised, and they're like, well, why would you do that? What's going to happen? I'm like, I don't know. It may not happen at all, but I'm just saying, if that happens, this is what I want you to do. And I really want you to be very serious, angry, malicious about doing it. Okay, got that? And they're like, yeah, okay, good. So the other part about this is I had to sit this woman all the way in the back of the lodge. So meaning that you go in, you go around the stone circle or the hole where the stones are, and to get in, and she had to crawl in there. Now, people that have been in sweat lodges know that this is kind of a tight space. And so she gets on the ground, she's just shaking, but she's so enthusiastic about getting in there. And she gets into the lodge, and I'm as closest to her as I can to help her get in so she can sit down there in the back of the lodge in the direction of death, because I'm at the door for life new beginnings. And that's this east facing sweat lodge. And then she's sitting there, and I can just barely see her because it's, late evening, the door's open in the lodge. I'm like, are you all right? She goes, yeah, I feel good. I feel good. I'm like, okay. And then I'm telling her too, I said, by the way, if for some reason, we're doing something and people outside start to take apart the sweat lodge, and start breaking it apart around us, I don't want you to stop. I don't want you to stop at all. Just keep doing whatever it is we're doing and talking or whatever, just uninterrupted. Just let whatever's happening happen. And she's like, okay, why? I'm like, I don't know. It's just a shamanic feeling. Said, okay. Here's a point where I'm going to go backtrack a little bit. When she came back to the lodge, or I'm sorry, came back to the house before we got down there, she wanted to tell me a little bit about the story. And come to find out that her husband died of AIDS. And she had had this kind of a quick affair with this young boy. And it was just kind of a come and go kind of a thing. And then they had to go get tests for something, either insurance or whatever. Excuse the rain. And then they found out both of them had the AIDS, and then the husband blamed their situation on her, and of course she felt horrible. His health really started to collapse, and finally, it got to where he was just bedridden in the hospital. And moments before his death, he made this confession. And the confession was that he used to go pick up these $20 girls, on Route 1 of Fort Lauderdale, which is just east of Davie, Florida. And that was a regular thing for him before and during their marriage. And he knew that he had the AIDS before she found out that she had it. And then he died. Just confessed all this stuff and died. And then she's just like in shock, like, what just happened? What did I just hear? Because it was just her and he in the room. And then, of course, now this turmoil of emotions that was going on inside of her because for all these years she was blaming herself for this whole situation, as he was too. And that had a big twist on her emotional body, and then her health really started to collapse after that. Husband dead, looking at all this, and then crunch. And she told me this before we went down to the lodge and said, wanted to know if I thought it had anything to do with it, any of this. I'm like, wow, could possibly. I have to think on this. And then, but at the same time, I'm thinking, yeah, I have to think of this as I'm getting ready to go through massive plan changes, you know, and just off the cuff, instinctive, impulsive moves. So we get in there. So now we're sitting in the lodge because I did not know what I was going to do in the lodge until we just sat down, and I just remembered this story, what she told me just when she first got there. So I told her, yeah, people might tear apart the lodge. So we do the basic prayers as I do before with every lodge of acknowledgments of healing, of thanks, and a pledge. Meanwhile, I'm putting water on the stones, and it's getting hotter in there. And I don't know if I was empathing her or feeling it because I've done hundreds and hundreds of lodges, but man, it felt super hot in there. And I was just not. I was being conservative. I didn't want to get it too hot, you know. And I asked her how she feels. She goes, "Oh, I feel great." I'm like, okay. I'm thinking I don't. I'm like, I said, so we've done all the basic prayers, but I feel that you didn't get closure, on your with your husband, because it all happened so fast. So I think now is a good time because a lot of times people use sweat lodges to communicate into the spirit world, and now's a good time for that. If you'd like to go ahead and tell your husband anything in particular, she goes, "Oh, I suppose I could." I said, "Yeah, so it's okay to just, you know, call out his name, summon his spirit towards you or make that interdimensional connection and see how that works, how that feel with you." She goes, "Okay." And she goes, "Well, honey," and for some reason I just interrupted and went, "Oh, yeah, every chick I know that's really pissed off about to her husband, it starts with, 'Oh, honey.'" And I looked at myself and I'm like, what did I just do? And she's like, well, what do you mean? I mean, you're about to die. That's what you told me. And you were given this disease by your husband who was out playing around with these $20 whores. And you start off with, honey, you're not mad. You're not pissed off about anything. Now I found myself being very antagonistic towards this woman in this extreme condition of the sweat lodge. And she goes, no, I forgive him. I'm like, oh, bullshit. You can't. Are you serious? She goes, well, I have some anger. And her voice starts to drop a little bit. And I could feel the breath starting to flow out. I'm like, there we go. Of course you are. Now, you didn't get to tell him you were angry before. How did it feel when you heard all this stuff? And then he just died. And I could just feel the emotional body of her just starting to go. And I'm thinking, am I pushing this woman too far for this situation? But again, my heart was feeling that this was okay. And she went, yeah, I don't feel happy about this. I had plans for life. I had, I'm like, don't tell me, tell him. And she did. To make it short, honey became all kinds of motherfuckers and everything else. I could just hear, the anger, the rage in this woman's voice. Her voice was lower, and I'm like, I don't think he hears you. Spirit world's far away. You still sound weak. I don't hear a mad woman. And then she really started to scream at the top of her lungs at her husband, the spirit or whoever. And I'm like, louder, and she was really letting it out. And then the blanket started to come off the sweat lodge. And they were just hacking, they were cutting the strings, and they were just going off and just pulling the sticks off and just breaking them. And I said, don't stop, keep going, and she was just finally, I mean, just feverishly, just viciously attacking him in every way possible. And my team kept tearing it apart. And this went on and on and on. And finally, the sweat lodge was destroyed. It was gone. We're just sitting there on the earth with nothing around us at all. And then she just looked over my shoulder, and she just like this, and she went, "Oh my God." I turned over like this, wondering what I was going to see. And the girl that was tending the fire to the sweat lodge was dancing like some crazed maniac, whooping and hollering and spinning around. Now, this young lady was a very, very Christian girl who came there to save our souls, get us away from our pagan ways, take us to Jesus. And that woman in her 20s was just like freaking out, dancing all wildly, doing this around the fire. And that fireplace had a pillar of fire that went up maybe 20 feet, spinning like a tornado. And I had just never seen anything like that in my life. And then I looked over real quick because I saw a movement, and the woman that was in the lodge with me stood up on her own and just arched her back and just did this and just looked around, just like feeling her body. And I'm sitting there looking at this, her friend is looking, I'm just like, no, 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 you know, and she look around the ground like this. It's like she was looking through new eyes or something. Is it okay for me to step out? Oh, yes. Yes, ma'am. Yes, please. She goes, I'm going to go to the house. Do we need to do anything else? No, ma'am. I'm happy to see you standing up like this. No, please go. I'll be right up, you know. And she just walks away with her friend. Her friend reached out to help. She went, no. And just taking little steps, but on her own completely, walking away, not even having the shoes on, walking across the field. And I'm looking at this, and I got like, okay, it's all good. It's all good. I look back, the fire's normal. The girl that was there just looking around like, what did I just do? And I looked up on the stable. We had a long building of stables at this farm area, and my apprentice with my three daughters was on the roof. And they see me looking up and they're waving, like, hey. I look back at my team. My team's just looking around like, what happened? And I stood up. I walked out where the door would be, and I'm just standing there. And I'm like, we'll talk later. Everybody's good? And they're like, yeah, yeah. Okay, pick up the blankets, put them on the lines to dry out, and I'll be back, you know. So I get up to the house, and like I said, all I had to do is walk an acre. I'm right at the house. I get up, they're gone. The car's gone, they're gone. I'm like, okay, I guess we're done. My team comes into the house. I'm like, people, I just got to get a shower and rinse off real quick, and we'll come back out. And we're in the kitchen, and I sit down at the table, and my daughter's like, Daddy, we saw the weirdest thing. I'm like, what? And I looked at my apprentice, Martina, and Martina, by the way, was an older apprentice. She was like in her 50s when she started. She's another story. They said, Daddy, there was this darkness in the darkness, and it was coming towards the sweat lodge. And they're small kids, And Martina's like, yeah, it was really strange. It was like there was a darker part of the night coming towards the lodge and just moving slowly. I'm like, what do you mean? She goes, and Martina was an artist. She goes, picture shading in a picture of night and then shading in another part of the night even more. And it looks really out of place and it's moving towards the lodge. I'm like, okay. She goes, oh yeah. She goes, we felt cold. Now this is southeast Florida in the summertime, and they're on a roof, and they're feeling cold. And she goes, it stopped just before the lodge when that woman started screaming, and then it just kind of faded out. Okay, to speculation. When people are like, well, what do you think happened? I have a lot of ideas and theories, and that's it. And a lot of people offer their opinions, but no proof. We don't know. That's the truth. We don't know. We don't know what made the fire do that. We have lots of theories about that. We don't know what made our girl jump around like that. I didn't mention any names, and I don't, for a lot of reasons. Martina recently died as a great shaman, so I'll mention her name. Um, so we're just talking about experiences and so on, and that was about it for the night. The next day, obviously, I have to clean up the site, start getting branches to make a new sweat lodge and so on. But, I called the number back for this woman and her friend. No one answered the phone. And I'm like, God, I just hope for the very best. And I'm expecting maybe the sheriff will be there one day and like, hey, did you do a sweat lodge with a woman, and so on. But nothing ever came from it, and a month went by. So one day I'm back in that area chopping wood for another sweat lodge for the following weekend. And this woman comes in or walks down the driveway to me, and I'm chopping the wood. And she says, hi, Hawk. I'm like, hi. She goes, how are you? Fine. I'm doing small talk. I'm like, did we have an appointment today or something? Did I forget something? She goes, no, no, no. I was just dropping by. I'm like, okay. And she goes, I just want to see what things you're doing and how things are going here. And I'm like, oh, it's just fine, fine. And then we're just talking. Finally, I'm like, man, I'm really sorry. I meet a lot of people, and I don't remember everybody's name and all. Could you help me out? And she just takes a step back. She looks at me. She goes, are you serious? Yeah, yes, ma'am. I'm sorry. I'm really serious. I'm sorry. She goes, come on, Hawk. You and I had this really hot night together. You don't remember that? I'm like, oh, God. No. Now I feel really bad. Could you please tell me a little bit more? She goes, yeah. During that really hot night we had together, your friends tore apart the sweat lodge around us, and I just dropped the axe in my hand. I just got dizzy. I just looked and was like, oh my God. And I just could not believe what I was seeing in front of me, because this woman looked like she could have been on the front cover of any health and fitness magazine. And I'm like, no, your friend was here, right? She goes, no, Hawk, that was me. And I'm like, she goes, I still have AIDS. My doctors told me that somehow my body made peace with it. And she started explaining all this scientific medical stuff I didn't understand. And she goes, I just wanted to come by and say thank you. She goes, can I give you a hug? Yeah, absolutely. I gave her a hug and we just talked a little bit more. And I'm like, wow, you're just absolutely beautiful. You look so healthy. She goes, yeah, thank you. I feel good. What was interesting is 10 years later, I was in Asheville, North Carolina. I'd gone up there. I used to go up there regularly for shamanic work. And I was telling this story. Okay, so this happened here with this woman in 1998, and so 2008 I'm up there, and I'm telling this story and ask if there's any questions, and one woman just raised her hand and stood up. She goes, "I've heard this story before." Really? Where? She goes, "From the woman you're talking about. She was up here a few months ago talking about forgiveness, talking about energy work, and she told this story and said she owed the last 10 years of her life to some crazy shaman in southeast Florida and his team for risking everything for a stranger." I'm like, wow, okay. I never saw this woman again, but I know for a fact that she did live at least another 10 years after that. I've had a lot of people try to explain how this worked, and give me their channeled opinion, their spirit guides, the info or whatever. Like, yeah, okay, and all very, very different stories. Can I explain what happened exactly? No, I cannot. Other than I allowed myself to trust in what I was doing impulsively, moment by moment, um, and she allowed me to take control of the situation and trusted that I would do the best for her in an extreme condition, an extremely trusting environment, and very, very unfamiliar territory. Um, I think I've said everything about this. It happened a long time ago. I've told this story a few times, but this was my biggest case, I think, as far as a one-on-one person. I've done big cases with regional areas and so on, and I'll always remember this. The project came to a close, and I'll talk about that in a different video, but um, we look at what's going on today, and the things that I see coming in the future. I see what's happening in the very near future as a gateway of humanity to make some huge jumps in consciousness. I see is that these times are great possibilities for us if we want to get away from the narrative, if we want to actually do something. And the actions that we need to take will have risk, just like with the situation I explained to you. Well, I've already done like a half hour, so I'll leave that alone. If you have any comments, leave them there. If you like any of the videos that I do, please subscribe, like, share the video. And that's about it. I wish you all the best.